Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, the Brit Pack is back. Show number 28, featuring fighting talk with a distinctly British flavour. My name is Simon Head, and joining me, as always, is my wingman, podcasting sparring partner, social media fiend, and man for all seasons, Mr. Chamatkar Sandhu. How are you, buddy?
I'm very well, sir. Speaking of all seasons, apparently in some parts of London, specifically Kew Gardens, it was 18 degrees today. Can you believe that? 18 degrees.
Get the shorts out.
Exactly. Summer is here, mate. Get the suntan lotion out. Get the lollipops and all sorts.
I'll just look white rather than my usual pale blue, which is my normal colour. So looking forward to that. We're kind of between shows right now. We had UFC Fight Night this past weekend in Nova Scotia, Canada. But we've got a bit of a gap as we lead into the next big show. So what we're going to do this week, we're going to take a look back at UFC Fight Night Halifax. There weren't that many expectations going into that event, but it really did deliver. It was a superb event on all counts. Spectacular fight card, great performances on the card, and a main event that just produced more talking points than you can shake a stick at. So we will look back at that. I was at the Indigo at the O2 on Saturday night for Cage Warriors 80. We'll have a quick chat about that. We'll also touch upon the events later that night in San Jose, California, as Bellator were all set to host one of the biggest fights that they'd ever staged, only for a kidney stone to render Matt Mitrione versus Fedor Emelianenko and basically lose it off the card. It's been postponed. It's going to happen again further down the line, but we'll talk about that as well. Got a few other bits and pieces to share with you, and of course we will answer your questions in our weekly Q&A. But let's launch straight into it, Sandy. UFC Fight Night Halifax. These are tricky cards for us British-based UFC fans who it's a long night watching a Fox UFC card at the best of times. When it's on a Sunday night and you've got to get up for work on a Monday, that really does require some serious commitment. And these Fox Fight Night cards don't always return the favour when it comes to great fights. We've not had some superb events for a while in terms of the Fox shows. This one was awesome. I thought it delivered on all fronts. I know you had an early start on Monday, so you had to get a bit of kip in early doors, didn't you?
Absolutely, I did. So I didn't see the prelims, but I did get up for the main card only. And to your point, normally I can check I can gauge the temperature with regards to how many of our fellow the UK members of the MMA community are up and kind of engaging with me or with us on social media during the fights. And on Sundays, it noticeably always drops. And I can get why I think the UFC does these Sunday shows traditionally through the NFL season, where they're trying to leverage off maybe a big American football game. But now with the Super Bowl come and gone, I just don't know what they got to piggyback on top of this. So, yeah, Sunday cards, it's pretty tough to kind of watch it, especially live. So for me, it was just the main card, and I went back to bed.
Well, you got up for a pretty decent main card. Now, sometimes when you look back on a fight card and you just sort of scan down the results, it can be a bit misleading because you take a look at the fight card, the main card from last night, and you run down that fight card, and we had 3 decisions on the spin. And sometimes it's easy to sort of see that and think, okay, 3 decisions, it wasn't that interesting. All 3 of those fights were pretty interesting to watch. But let's kick things off with the main event, the big talking points of the weekend for sure. The Black Beast himself, Derrick Lewis, somebody who's become a little bit of a cult hero within the space of the last 12 to 18 months, has catapulted himself into legitimate contender status, I think. Destroyed Travis Browne, knocked him out second round, 3 and a bit minutes. Wasn't going his way early on, looked like he was really suffering with some kicks to the body. And at that point, I've got to be honest, I thought that fight was not going to last much longer. I thought Browne was going to finish him there and then, but Lewis came back brilliantly. One of the most brutal knockouts I've seen in the UFC for quite some time, and a terrible stoppage by referee Mario Yamasaki. But first off, let's talk about Derrick Lewis, Sandhu. That was That was a breakout performance from him. I know there's been a bit of hype behind him. He's got a lot of momentum behind him. But now he's for real. I think people now know that he's legit at the top of this UFC heavyweight division.
Yeah, and that's his second main event back-to-back, and in the space of a couple of months, which is incredible. This guy, his star just continues to rise. At first, it was just kind of his social media presence, and he started to get a few wins together. But now it's all about his performances, and I think the Travis Browne victory was the kind of rubber stamp on his on the 6-fight win streak he's now put together, 5 of which have come by way of knockout or TKO. Let me just have a look. He's currently ranked number 8. I would like to think that performance is going to probably propel him into that number 5 spot. Ahead of him right now, you've got Mark Hunt, Francis Ngannou, and Ben Rothwell. If he's not within the top 5, he's definitely going to be in and around abouts there. And I think now, he said he wants to take maybe 3 months off, just to kind of relax a little bit, unwind, maybe work on his game, and maybe to partake in some extracurricular activities.
Get some sex, is basically what you said.
Yes, yeah, in no uncertain words. But then come back, and then I think maybe make a run for it in the second half of this year. See if he can get. I think the next fight has to be a number 1 contenders fight for him. Now, whether that's up against somebody like, I don't know, an Overeem Velasquez, maybe a Rothwell type of fighter. There's some people that are calling for Ngannou. I don't want to see Lewis Ngannou just yet.
No.
I want to savor that. Maybe see that somewhere further down the road. But it was an absolute breakout performance. This is the one. That's the one that's put him on the map. It was a hell of an entertaining post-fight interview to boot, and he's definitely a character. And you can't get enough characters in the UFC, especially in the heavyweight division. And it's not every day you get a heavyweight that puts 6 wins together like this. So I think now the UFC needs to put the rocket boosters on him and just launch him to the moon.
Yeah, definitely. You take a look at some of the names in that 6-fight run, and they're kind of middle-of-the-road UFC heavyweights. The ones that stand out are obviously the split decision win against Roy Nelson, the only guy to have taken him the distance in this particular run of form, and obviously this weekend's brutal stoppage of Travis Browne. I think if you can get past Roy Nelson, and if you can knock out Travis Browne in the way that he did, I think you have to take this guy seriously. I know he might not be the most refined athlete or sort of technician inside the octagon, but when you're a heavyweight, that really doesn't always matter. You just go in there, you can impose your will on other people and produce performances like that, because from a technical standpoint, he was distinctly second best in that fight. Travis Browne came into it with a really good game plan, using his length, using his kicks in particular, and was doing a really good job. I thought he was fighting from a tactical perspective, was doing things almost exactly how I would have expected him to. But then Lewis just decided he'd had enough, and decided he was going to walk through some of that stuff from Browne. Once he got his hands on him, the fight completely changed. You mentioned who he could potentially fight next. Mark Hunt is fighting Alistair Overeem at UFC 209. I'd like to see him face the winner of that. I think that would make a lot of sense, because I don't think the winner of the Hunt Overeem fight is going to automatically get a title shot next. I think Verdum and Velasquez obviously ranked above those two, and JDS is taking on Stipe next. So you would think that whoever wins that Overeem Hunt fight is going to need at least one more win in order to get themselves into a title fight. Why not make that the fight with Derrick Lewis, and the winner of that then finds himself in that number 1 contender spot? That would make a lot of sense to me. But Derrick Lewis is a funny guy. He's a bit of a cult hero. Not always the most appropriate of things to say in a post-fight interview, but it got people talking, and I suppose in fight sports that is probably the second most important thing besides winning, is getting people talking about you, and he certainly achieved that this weekend, both with his performance and with what he said afterwards. Good performance from Derrick the Black Beast Lewis. A good performance too from Johnny Big Rig Hendricks in the co-main event. I've got to be honest, Sandhu, I thought he was going to get beat on Sunday night by Hector Lombard, but Hendricks grew into that fight. I think he probably lost the opening round, but I think he grew into that fight and looked by far the better guy going down the stretch. Lombard, notorious for not having the deepest gas tank in the UFC. Very explosive early on. Hendricks was quite wary of that. Rode out that early round, and then on my card at least won rounds 2 and 3. Interestingly, 2 of the judges scored him 30-27, which I found a little interesting. I didn't think he'd won. I didn't think he won all 3, but I did think he won the fight. I thought it was good to see a happy Johnny Hendricks back in the octagon again. Last few fights, he's looked like someone who sort of fallen out of love with the sport a little bit, but we've seen glimpses now of someone who looks a lot happier, and be interesting to see what happens with Hendricks, because he's not a big middleweight, and I think it was being commented on during the fights that he may have one of the shortest reaches in the UFC middleweight division, and you compare him with someone like a Luke Rockhold or someone like that, he's going to look quite small by comparison, but he's happy at that weight class, and it'd be interesting to see how he does. But he did well on Saturday against a very dangerous guy in Hector Lombard.
Yeah, he did. I mean, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything there. Not much more to add there from me, apart from the fact that I picked him to win. I didn't think he'd have to take him to the distance, Lombard, but he did eventually. I thought we might be able to clip Hector Lombard, only because Lombard has lost recently quite a few times by knockout or TKO, and I thought that a middleweight, without being so, I suppose, de-energized by the weight cut, he might be able to kind of, generate the power and the momentum at some points throughout the fight to kind of get that knockout blow. He didn't eventually in the end, but what he did display was a lot of cardio, and he talked about it in his post-fight interview. And I think he'll hopefully be able to grow into this weight class. It'll be tough to match him up, and I think that's where Sean Shelby is going to have to be really careful how you play with Johnny Hendricks as a matchmaker, because I agree. I think if you just chuck him straight into the deep end now with a Chris Weidman or a Luke Rockhold, someone who's a tall, legitimate middleweight. I mean, some of these guys are cutting down. Some of these guys could be legitimate light heavyweights that are cutting down a hell of a lot of weight to hit that 185 mark. I think he'll just be outsized. So give him some time to let him grow into this weight class and just figure things out. No, he won't have the reach advantage, but we saw some really good stuff from him in the clinch, some really good display of technical wrestling there. He was able to defend the takedown against an Olympic level judo athlete in Hector Lombard very, very well. And I thought that there were some displays in the clinch and in the pocket that he did all right. So I think the main thing for him was just to get the W. And it kind of gets him back on that positive track now, and he can start to build from that. So again, I think a lot of people in the MMA community were really happy for Johnny Hendricks, because he's had a rough time over the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely, and interesting to see, as you say, what Sean Shelby will do with him for his next fight. I think one potential option could be against a guy who also won on that main card on Saturday night, Elias Theodorou, who defeated Cesar Ferreira by unanimous decision, 30-27, 29-28, 29-28. I thought Ferreira might just have nicked that fight, to be honest with you, but I've got a few of these judges' decisions wrong over the course of the night. But Theodorou got the nod. He might be a good opponent for Johnny Hendricks. Someone else who sprang to mind, if they want to put him in there with a ranked middleweight, obviously Hector Lombard, obviously very dangerous, and if he competed regularly at middleweight, he may well be ranked, but I don't think he is at the moment. Sam Alvey, smiling Sam Alvey might be an interesting matchup. Two guys who both like to bang. I think that might be an interesting matchup as well. But as you say, I think the size differential with some of the really big guys in that division might prove a little too much for Big Rig, but. Hopefully we see a few more good performances out of him, and who knows, maybe he can fight his way up that 185-pound division. Someone who's looking to fight his way up the 145-pound division is Gavin Tucker, who, I'll be honest with you, I knew virtually nothing about going into this event, taking on Sam Sicilia, who is known for being a heavy-handed slugger, and you don't want to stand in front of him for too long because he has got some serious power in his hands. Gavin Tucker basically did a Cody Garbrandt on him and just ran rings round him for three rounds, 30-27 on all three cards in his hometown of Halifax in Canada. And he looks like one to watch, Sandhu. I was really impressed with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just one of many really young, up-and-coming featherweights. And the featherweight division is just amazing right now. It's just brewing with so much young talent. And it's going to be amazing to see some of these young kids over the course of the next 3 or 4 years and watch them mature as fighters. And I think the best, of course, is still yet to come. But it was a great debut for Tucker, especially in Halifax, like you said, Simon, in his backyard, in his hometown. Definitely got the pop of the night. The crowd are really, behind him. And in fact, I was looking on social media. He's not a prolific tweeter, but the last time he did tweet was 2 years ago, where the last time when the UFC was in Halifax, and he was trying to get on the card then. Didn't manage to get it done then, but he was certainly, in the mix on the main card this time around. And it was a really, really dominant, one-sided, entertaining performance. He was able to kind of showboat a little bit, not too much, because I think everyone's by now would have seen sometimes what too much showboating can get you in this sport. I actually picked Sam Sicily to win prior to the fight. I didn't really know too much about Tucker like you, Simon, and I thought at some point that Sam would have hit that left hook that he loves to hit at some point during the fight, but it was all Tucker, and he kind of made Sam Sicily look really, really old and weathered there. So yeah, a really good performance there from Tucker.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think they were like 2 rounds in or a round and a half in, and they put up the punch stats. I think Cecilia had landed 3 strikes the entire fight up to that point. Like round and a half, 2 rounds. Incredible stuff. Tucker just always presenting a moving target, incredibly difficult to hit. And as I say, I didn't know much about him going in, and I certainly raised my eyebrows when I saw the card placement. Seeing that particular fight so high up the card, I was thinking, well, why have they put that fight there when there's the likes of Theodorou and McMahon and Felder, and even the Randa Marcos Carla Esparza fight significantly further down the card? But now it makes total sense. Gavin Tucker looks the real deal, and as you say, you can throw him straight in the mix with. I think featherweight's got to be the most talent-rich division. I know probably 6 to 8 months ago we were talking about the lightweights being the strongest, but I think they've probably been overtaken now. The featherweight division looks seriously talent stacked, and they're all young guys on the way up as well, so lots to look forward to at 145 pounds. Mentioned Elias Theodorou getting a win over Cesar Ferreira, 30-27, 29-28, 29-28. Little side note, I think it was a British fan actually tweeted him in the lead up to the fight and said, if you win and give me a shout out on the mic, I will get a tattoo of your face and your beautiful hair. So straight away after he won the fight, before he even talked about the fight pretty much, Elias took the opportunity to look straight down the camera lens, call out the chap in question who, according to Elias, he's going to fly him out to Canada to get it done out there, so he gets the guy gets a trip to Canada out of it, which is no bad thing. But I thought that was kind of interesting as well. Catch weight fight. Yeah. Oh, sorry, mate. Go on. Yeah, before.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, not too much to add. I mean, apart from the fact that I think Elias Theodorou has got a very awkward, weird fighting style. It's very unorthodox. It's not the kind of standard kind of fighting style you see out of anyone, really. And I'm still personally trying to wrap my head around what he's trying to do at times in the octagon. And at times I do feel quite scared for him, because I think he leaves himself open. And I think, at some point he's going to find himself in front of an elite killer of a striker. And it might be night for him at some point down the road, because I'm not really feeling too confident about his fighting style. Away from the cage, top lad. We spent some time with him in Belfast, behind the scenes. Great guy. I really do feel as though he needs to, work on some things with Faraz Zahabi and the rest of the crew there at TriStar. Because, like I said, I think right now, the way Sean Shelby and the folks there have matchmaked him, it's been all right. But I think the further he kind of gets up the ladder there, I think he'll get exposed. But on the night, it was a good win, especially in Canada. Always good to get a fellow countryman a win. And who knows, now with the return of GSP around the corner, perhaps GSP will bring a mega card back to Montreal, Canada, and some of these Canadians that have been kind of holding the heavy water in his absence can get a bit of the rub now with George St. Pierre on the comeback.
Yeah, he's very unique style of fighting, Elias Theodorou. But the one thing he hasn't been able to do is parlay that into stoppage finishes. I think if you're that unorthodox but you can finish people, I think that kind of works in your favour. But I think, as you say, I think there needs to be another level to what he's doing. He's certainly got a lot of fans. He's very popular on social media. He's very engaging on social media. And as you say, we were fortunate to spend a bit of time with him over in Belfast, and he's a genuinely nice guy. But I think we're getting to the stage where they're going to need to test him against a top 10 guy, and then I think we'll see just how far he might be able to go in the sport. Someone who looks like they've really kicked up a gear, and they seem destined for a title shot eventually. Sarah McMahon, who seems to have found a completely another level to her game in the last couple of performances. She put Alexis Davis away very, very convincingly last time round. She fought Gina Mazzani, who was making a UFC debut. She was in the Tough House, but didn't quite make it all the way through to the final. But she's undefeated in professional fights. The fights in the Tough House are technically exhibition fights, so they don't count towards your record. But she handed Gina Mazzani her first ever loss. It lasted just 74 seconds. Arm triangle submission once again. And Sarah McMahon looks the real deal right now. She looks like she's sharpened up her striking. Her wrestling, we already know, is elite level, having won an Olympic silver medal in freestyle wrestling. And she's got the submission skills to go with it. She looks a serious threat at 135 pounds, Sandhu.
Yeah, she was the one I was probably most impressed with outside of perhaps Derrick Lewis throughout the main card. Not too long ago, she got a couple of back-to-back losses against... Well, let's put it this way. Her 3 losses in the UFC have come at the hands of Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate, and Amanda Nunes. 2 of those are former UFC bantamweight champions, and Amanda Nunes obviously is a current champion. So, take that for what it's worth. But aside from that, she's got this 3-fight win streak put together. But it's particularly the last 2 fights. The fight against Alexis Davis and Gina Mazzani this past weekend, where she's been able to really harness her jiu-jitsu with her wrestling, get top control, get that arm triangle choke in. And she just looks like a completely different fighter. And I'm really excited and intrigued to see where this kind of development goes throughout this year. She's calling for a title shot. I don't think she's going to get it. But I think her next fight should be in some sort of number 1 contenders fight to get the next title shot. And I think the next time she does fight for the title, whether it's against Amanda Nunes or whoever the case may be, Valentina Shevchenko, I think she's going to be much better prepared than she was the first time when she fought Ronda Rousey back at UFC 170. That was back in February 2014. So big ups to Sarah McMahon, massive props to her. She's now 36. She's been a career athlete, and she's finally putting it all together. And it's great to see. It's just great to see. Sometimes I think when you see athletes from different sports or from different parts of combat sports come in after they've already committed, the better part of a lifetime to one discipline, they come in and they're pretty one-dimensional, and they just can't put the elements of the game together. But she's taken her losses on her chin. She's gone to the gym and she's worked it all out. Like you said, she's improved her striking. She's definitely improved her jiu-jitsu. And I'm actually really, really excited to see how much further she can go now.
Yeah, I think she's probably going to need to take one more fight before she gets into a title fight. Juliana Pena might be a good option for her. Pena's currently ranked 3rd in the world. She's coming off a loss to Shevchenko, but she's still very much right up there in the mix. Looking at the bantamweight rankings, which look all over the place, to be honest, Ronda Rousey is currently ranked number 2. Holly Holm has dropped 2 spots from number 2 to number 4. Quite how Holly Holm has dropped below Ronda Rousey in the bantamweight rankings is slightly confusing to me, but there you go. So you got Shevchenko number 1. She's going to fight Amanda Nunes. Rousey 2, she's not likely to fight again as far as we can make out. Pena 3, Holm 4. So I think Pena would be a good fight. I think that would make a lot of sense. I think it makes sense for Pena, and I think it makes sense for McMahon. The winner of that can then slot in possibly as the next number one contender. But yeah, I was super impressed with the performance on Saturday night. And I was very impressed with the performance of Paul Felder, the Irish Dragon. We mentioned Elias Theodorou. We had the chance to spend a bit of time with him over in Belfast. He was joined on that trip by Paul Felder, who proceeded to, having heard about my needle phobia, completely freaked the hell out of me by describing in far too vivid a detail the process of having his eyelids stitched up after a fight where it was just horrible. It was horrible. But he's a good guy as well, and he's one hell of a fighter as well. And he put on a good performance against Alessandro Ricci, who was a sizable underdog on that card, but was coming in with a fair amount of confidence. Felder just smashed him with a step-in elbow to the nose, which looked like it broke Ricci's nose pretty much on impact, smelling around corners after that, and ended up crumpled down against the fence where Felder just finished him off. Great performance from him. That was the main card. Felder picked up $50,000 for a performance of the night bonus for that. Thiago Santos also picked up $50,000 performance of the night bonus for his win on the preliminary card against Wales' Jack Marshman. It was a picture-perfect spinning heel kick that landed pretty much on Marshman's ear and sent him to the mat. There was a lot of complaining on Twitter immediately after the finish, where people were suggesting the referee had stepped in a little too early. My initial thought was that it might have been a touch early, but I watched the first replay and thought, no, I think that was a completely legitimate stoppage. Marshman was getting absolutely dinged on the mat as well. So how did you see that, Sandhu? Because I know you've watched the replay, you've watched that fight in particular since. I know you weren't up for that one as it was live, but you've watched it since. Did you think that stoppage was early, or did you think it was fair?
When I first saw it, I thought it was a little early. And then I watched it in slow motion, and I saw it a couple of more times, and I thought, well, actually, you know what? That was a good stoppage. I'd rather a referee stop it too early than too late. And I think this is the polar opposite of what we saw in the main event, where Mario Yamasaki was pedestrian and getting there to protect Browne after he was already completely unconscious, and yet the Black Beast Derrick Lewis raining down with more punches, with ferocity. In the Santos Marshman fight, it was a good stoppage. Marshman was visibly rocked already by the spinning heel kick, which was this fantastic technique to see. I don't know why, but we're starting to see a lot more spinning heel kick finishes, or definitely seeing that technique connect a lot more than we used to back in the day. So that's fantastic to see. Very pleasing on the eye. But yeah, I had no problems at all with the stoppage in the end.
Yeah, I thought Marshman was beginning to come into that fight as well. Santos started the better of the two. Then Marshman dropped Santos with a huge right hand, and it was right at the end of the round, I think. And it looked like the fight was gradually turning into his favour. And anyone who watches a Jack Marshman fight knows that he normally has to walk through quite a bit of punishment before he eventually gets his stuff off. But he normally prevails in the end. And it felt to me that the fight was gradually moving towards Marshman. I felt he was growing into the fight, and Santos was beginning to struggle to deal with Marshman's sort of forward pressure. But then he produced that incredible spinning heel kick. And it takes quite a bit to put Jack Marshman away. And that was pretty damn impressive. An early contender for one of the knockouts of the year, for sure, from Thiago Moreta Santos. Just very quickly on that preliminary card, Ayman Zahabi, brother of Firas Zahabi, the head coach of TriStar, he claimed a debut victory at bantamweight, defeating Regiano Vieira by unanimous decision. I thought Vieira won that fight, so there's another example of me getting it wrong. But I scored that 29-28 for Vieira. It was a very, very close fight, but Zahabi got the decision in Canada. as did Randa Marcos, who beat Carla Esparza. Also, I thought Carla Esparza won that fight. The judges were split on that one, 29-28. Scores were submitted across the board. 2 of them for Marcos, 1 of them for Esparza. Marcos and Esparza had a bit of a history in the Ultimate Fighter, Sandhu. Marcos had accused Esparza and some of her friends in the Tough House of bullying her. And she gave a bit of a speech afterwards on the mic. And our friend Mike Bond from MMA Junkie tweeted earlier today, there aren't many flights in and out of Halifax. And Mike was on the same flight as some of the fighters. And it turned out that due to, I'm sure, pure coincidence and unfortunate coincidence, Randa Marcos and Carla Esparza were basically sat on either side of the aisle on the same row as each other. So that would have been nice and awkward for the pair of them as they flew back from Canada. But Randa Marcos, yeah, it was a solid performance. Very strange fighting style. She changed her stance completely in that fight, but she got the split decision win. And the other prelim fight at the top of that card, good fight as well. Santiago Ponzinibbio defeated Nordine Taleb by unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. That was UFC Fight Night in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. But we also had Bellator at the weekend. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't watch it live because we struggle to get Bellator events live in the UK at the moment. We spoke to Scott Coker about it the other day, didn't we, Sandhu? And it's all coming, isn't it? They're working on all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, they are, and I guess if you're gonna watch it, you're gonna have to find some kind of a means, whether it's illegal, call it what you want. I mean, unofficial. That's a good way of term. Phrasing it. But to be honest with you, Si, I was actually gonna stay up for it. So I set my alarm. Went to bed early on Saturday night, like I normally do, to get a little nap in. Set my alarm just in time for the main card to start. My alarm goes off. I've scrolled through my mentions on Twitter, find out that Matt Mitrione's got kidney stones, and the fight's off. And I'm like, right, well, that's that then. I'm going to go back to bed. That was the main attraction. This is arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time, making a comeback, fighting on American soil after many, many years, on a major platform here in the US against, a real legitimate opponent in Matt Mitrione. And I feel for Mitrione because this was going to be I'm sure a big payday for him. I'm sure it would have gone a long way if he been able to fight and beat Fedor to legitimize himself and cement his legacy as a top heavyweight during his time in this sport. I've had kidney stones when I was really young. Yeah, one of the most painful experiences of my entire life, no doubt about it. And the relief once you finally, get it out of your system and it passes through as you're weeing away, Jesus Christ, it's excruciating pain. And I looked at Mitrione's mentions on social media, and I think he finally passed the stone while he was in Dallas airport. So he deposited the stone in Dallas. So there you have that. And from what it looks like, they're going to try and make the fight happen again in a couple of months' time back in San Jose. But it's really unfortunate. I think Simon, you and me were talking about this a little bit before we started the show. It just felt like, recently and even forthcoming with their upcoming cards, Bellator are in a state of momentum where they're in the news a hell of a lot. They're making headlines, they're making waves, they're putting together some really interesting fights. They're slowly but surely kind of getting away from some of the freak show fights of the past, and they're actually putting together legitimate fights with fighters who are arguably top 10, top 15, top 20 guys, and fighters who could arguably be in the UFC right now. So this is a little bit of a bump in the road for them. It'll be interesting to see how the show did on the US ratings on Spike TV. Also a little bit unfortunate. Obviously, I haven't seen the card, but I know the results. That the hometown boys, Josh Thompson and Josh Koscheck, being from San Jose, being so affiliated with the AKA team, they both suffered losses, so that wouldn't have done good, especially in the SAP Center, the old Shark Tank Arena, being in San Jose, also Scott Coker's hometown. And I'm sure you and me will talk about that and much more when Bellator hold their second London press conference tomorrow. So we record this on a Monday. They're going to be holding a press conference with Rory McDonald, Paul Daly, Michael Venom Page, Derek Anderson, who is Michael Venom Page's opponent, won't be there, but Bobby Lashley will be there along with Scott Coker. So that takes place tomorrow, and I'm sure we'll recap that all on next week's show. But yeah, like we were saying, Simon, just a little bit of a bump on the road in what seems to have been a really real purple patch for Bellator as of late.
Yeah, definitely, and it's good to hear that they're going to put that fight back on, and in San Jose as well. So the San Jose fight fans who were planning to enjoy watching Fedor's return will still get the chance to be there and do that. So sometimes when fights fall through, they end up being rescheduled for a different city as well. So, you know, the fact that they're coming back to San Jose, I think, is a good thing. The main event was Patricky Freire knocking out Josh Thompson 40 seconds into the second round. Co-main event saw Chet Congo defeat Britain's own Ollie Thompson, smothered him for 3 rounds. 2:30-25 scores returned by the judges in that particular fight. The third one was 30-26. So you can tell that it was pretty one-sided. Man to look out for, Anatoly Tokov, with a second round TKO of Francisco France. Anatoly Tokov was the ACB middleweight champion. That man is a straight killer. Watch out for him. I'll just mention that. He is a straight killer. Keep an eye out for him. And you mentioned, obviously, Josh Koscheck losing out 4 minutes, 42 seconds he lasted in that first round before he was eventually TKO'd by Mauricio Alonso. That was Bellator on Saturday night. I was in London on Saturday night, Sandhu. We had Cage Warriors 80 took place on Saturday night. And it was pretty good. It was pretty good. It was streamed on UFC Fight Pass. And Cage Warriors has a new welterweight champion, and it's a man that we're both familiar with, Carl Amasu, who went in there against Matt Mitrione, who is a very well seasoned fighter from the SBG Manchester team, who are producing a lot of really, really high level guys at the moment over here in the UK. But he got blasted by Carl Amasu, who won the fight by TKO stoppage in the first round. I think that makes it something like 6 in a row. I think it's 6 in a row. First round stoppages for Carl Amasu, who donned a t-shirt saying, "Hey, UFC, it's time," and then gave a very emotional speech. He wants in the UFC, and after a performance like that, I don't blame him. I think he deserves his shot. You've seen Amasu perform in the past. What do you make of him, Sandhu?
He should have been in the UFC a while ago, in my opinion. I saw him fight last year in Finland, in Helsinki, Euro FC, with their to date one and only MMA event, and he was phenomenal then. We were talking about this off air before we started the show, Simon. You got guys like Carl Amasu, Francis Ngannou, and a couple of others, and it's so unfortunate that MMA isn't legal in France, because I think you've got plenty of fighters who are performing on the world stage, who could really lead the wave, introduce the sport to the next generation of fighters, be role models, be idolized by the next generation of fans and upcoming fighters, and really help get the sport to the next level. Do all the long yards, be the Michael Bisping of England and the Conor McGregor of Ireland in their respective country of France. But they don't have the opportunity just yet because it is illegal. But going back to the question, 100% Carl Amasu should be in the UFC. Now that he's the welterweight champion, I would like to perhaps see him at least defend it once, maybe before he jumps over to the UFC, or if the UFC would even sign him. That's a whole other can of worms right there. I mean, they just let Horiguchi go, whose only defeat was to Demetrius Johnson. So who knows how the UFC's hiring and firing policy is, and who they're going to let go, and who they're going to re-sign, and who they're really going to go after. Who brings something to the table. I still don't understand. I think a lot of us don't understand. The formula that WME IMG put together when they're figuring out who they want to keep and who they want to let go. And Kyle Amasu, as good as he is, and as a fantastic as a fighter as he is, and he's literally a veteran of the sport at this stage of his career, he may not get that call up anytime soon. Who knows if what he's bringing to the table is what WME IMG wants. We just don't know. What he's done, though, is he's aligned himself with the best route to the UFC, and that's Cage Warriors. They've got that partnership with the UFC. They distribute it on UFC Fight Pass. I saw on social media, you were there, Simon. You almost had the old Cage Warriors alumni of fighters make a special appearance alongside John Gooden and Dan Hardy, and that was a nice little touch, just to kind of bring a little fan interaction type of session to the overall Cage Warriors event, to kind of add little bells and whistles to it. So he's with the right organization. Cage Warriors has got a long history of feeding the UFC, the best of the bunch when it comes to European MMA talent. So if he's going to get to the UFC, this is going to be the route to do it.
Definitely. I think at last count, I think Cage Warriors have sent 79 fighters into the UFC, which is pretty good going. And if you think that some of those names include Dan Hardy, Michael Bisping, Conor McGregor, Ioanni Jacek, Ross Pearson, there's some serious talent going into the UFC and sticking around. I think that's the most important thing. Getting into the UFC is one thing. Getting in and staying in, and not just getting blasted out of there and sent back from to the regional scene. I think that's important as well. So it shows that if you come through the system, then you've got a good chance of sticking around, because Ian Dean, the matchmaker there, he does a very good job of putting on competitive fights that test the athletes involved. So, it was an entertaining card. We had some surprise results on the night. Craig White defeated Thomas Robertson in the first bout of the main card. He's one to watch out for. He's got a good outlook on fighting. He goes in very much with his eyes open. He's not looking at this as a career. He's looking at it as a vocation. I think he treats it in many ways as people do when they play football at weekends. He knows that this is only going to be available to him for a certain amount of time. It was interesting listening to him do some of his post-fight interviews afterwards. Craig the Thundercat White, he needs to walk out to the Thundercat theme tune though. That needs fixing. I don't think he walked out to that. Alexander Jacobson probably got the biggest shock of the night. He defeated Tim Wilde via TKO. Tim Wilde was lighting him up for about 3 minutes and 45 seconds of that first round, then got hit with one punch, and that finished the fight. It was ridiculous. Jacobson wants to move up there and challenge for the Cage Warriors title at lightweight, and I don't think he's going to get there just yet. I think he might need another win, but he was getting lit up. Tim Wilde looked really good, and then he got sucker punched, and unfortunately he ended up on the wrong end of it. Frenchman Anthony Dizzy pulled off another shock, beating Martin Stapleton via unanimous decision. Fight just didn't go Stapleton's way, and he admitted as much afterwards. He wants to jump straight back in there. I think he wants to be on that Liverpool card later in the year at the Echo Arena, looking to put things right. Just wasn't the Martin Stapleton we're used to seeing for whatever reason. Dizzy smothered him mostly for that fight. Co-main event, Brad Wheeler, a veteran of Cage Warriors, defeated Warren Key, just a veteran of mixed martial arts. Warren Key's 43 years of age, Sandhu, and still getting in there and doing it. And all credit to him. He's still a solid competitor at 43. Brad Wheeler's been around for a long time. I think that might have been his 20th career win from 30 career fights. He got the TKO, lovely body shot. Baz Rutten would have loved it. Left hand to the left hand liver shot. Game over. Absolutely folded him up like a deck chair. So second round finish for him, and obviously Cole Amasu beating Matt Inman in 3 minutes 13 seconds to win that vacant welterweight title. Really good fun event. If anyone in London wants to go and watch some live MMA, Cage Warriors aren't a bad show to go watch. The setup at the Indigo at the O2, which is their new home, is pretty cool. For anybody who was at the UFC London weigh-ins last year, it's in there. at the Indigo, and the whole of the floor is standing room. It's just the standing area. The cage is up on a stage. You get great sight lines, and you've got the seating up above in the upper deck, so to speak. Tickets were pretty cheap. I think it was like 15-20 quid. So really good night out. I couldn't recommend it more. It was really good fun. Good fun night, and they're coming back. I think June the 2nd, Graham Boylan said, on the night. And if you want to watch that event back, and you've got a UFC Fight Pass subscription, you can do that, and check out that event and some of the other past Cage Warriors events. But yeah, looking forward to seeing what they do next.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to ask you about that. I'm kind of glad you mentioned it, because the last Cage Warriors event I went to was a couple of years back at Kentish Town, the Forum.
Yes.
I think it was. And actually, that was Joanna Jędrzejczyk's last fight on the regional circuit before she ended up getting signed by the UFC. And I think on that very same show, Darren the Dentist Springer was also fighting on that particular card. And obviously he's now in the UFC as well. So like you said, it's just great to see Cage Warriors and Bama. They're making their waves in various parts of the UK and Ireland, just helping cultivate that local talent, getting these fighters the reps in, getting their records up and running, so that they can hopefully make a name for themselves and hopefully one day get signed by the likes of the UFC or by the Bellators of the world. Get some bigger paydays, bigger contracts, fight on bigger stages, both here on this side of the Atlantic and the other side as well. So good to see that the UFC and Cage Warriors have got a good partnership there as a nice sort of feeder system.
Yeah, and it looks as if they're looking to be pretty prolific as well. We're talking a show almost every 3-4 weeks by the sound of it. We've got, what's the next show that Cage Warriors are doing? They're doing Dublin at the 3 Arena next month. They're then going to Liverpool, the Echo Arena. Paddy Pimblett headlining against Nad Naramari for the Cage Warriors Featherweight Championship. That's a
tough fight. That's a tough fight for Paddy.
Nad Naramari is solid. So that's going to be a good fight. And that's the main event, April 1st. And Graham Boylan announced during the show on Saturday that they're coming back to the Indigo at the O2. I think they said June the 2nd. And they're making the Indigo their home. And the way they staged the event was a little different. It's got a bit of a party vibe to it. A lot of standing fans. They had a DJ deck there. I think Paddy Pimblett might have done a bit of DJing on the night. I was out back at the time, so I missed it. But yeah, it was a good event. I recommend checking it out the next time they're in town. So yeah, that was Cage Warriors. That is pretty much what we have in terms of the fighting or sort of event-based stuff for this weekend. But as always, you've been very kind and sent a whole load of questions into us. So now might be a good time to rip through and answer all your pressing questions in the world of mixed martial arts before we lock this one up and head off for the week.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, before I start, thank you everyone for tweeting in. It's the Brit Pack MMA. That's the Twitter handle. Feel free to shoot us questions throughout the week, and I'll start to compile them before we start the show every Monday. So this week we start with Rideman, who says, do you think Lewis should fight Ngannou soon or wait up until they've both been beaten more, or wait until they've beaten more of the division? Yeah. I've pretty much already answered that, Simon, so what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think you want to kill your prospects off at this stage. I think, especially in a division that's got a lot of aging guys at the top of the division, you want to build the young guns, so to speak. I know Derrick Lewis is, well, in fact, Lewis and Ngannou, they're not young. They're both in their 30s, but they're both new contenders who they've still got plenty of upside. So I think keep them apart for now. And then if they meet in a number one contender fight, fine. If they meet in a championship fight, fine. But I think to put them against each other at this point, when they're both still rising prospects, if you like, or emerging contenders, it doesn't really push the winner that far up. But what it does do is it pushes the loser quite a way down. So I think the upside doesn't really make that feasible at this stage. I think Ngannou and Lewis needs to be fighting established, big name opposition next, definitely.
Stuart Tuckwell, he sent a couple of tweets in, and they're pretty much all about the Ultimate Fighter, the new season of Tough coming up. So I'm going to try and read them all out in conjunction. Is the new series of The Ultimate Fighter focusing too much on reality TV rather than giving good fighters a second chance? Is it surprising that more fighters from the last season of Tough weren't signed, especially with the likes of Horiguchi, Bagatinov, and Makovsky being recently released? So, I mean, I don't know about you, Simon. Like, I think I like the idea of the comeback season, but I think it's something they could have done a couple of years ago when everybody was really clamoring for it. I think this is a little bit too late. I don't really think I'm going to be watching it any more than I have watched any of the previous seasons. Having looked at the cast, yeah, there's some fun names in there. You've got, the chap that kind of had the famous "Let me bang, bro" line. I think his name's Dwayne Lane, if memory serves me correctly, something along the lines of that. You've got Seth Brzezinski. You've got a few familiar names in there. I just don't. It's not doing it for me, Simon. Is it doing it for you? Are you going to be tuning in week out on this season of The Ultimate Fighter?
Yeah, I am. I am. I'm a sucker for this stuff.
Okay.
But I am, because I'm looking at the list. There's some good guys. Mehdi Baghdad, Seth Brzezinski, Eddie Gordon, Hayder Hassan. James Krause is the one contracted guy who's in there. I like James Krause as a fighter. Diego Lima, Ramsey Nijim, Joe Daddy Stevenson is coming back after all these years. Hector Urbina's an exciting fighter. I think this is going to shape up to be a really exciting tournament. If we forget the fact that it's a television program for a second, as a tournament, I think it will be quite exciting. I think we'll get some good competitive action out of this particular season of The Ultimate Fighter. I don't necessarily think they've picked these guys for being great on TV, so that kind of answers the first part of that question that we had from Stuart. I just think that these are the guys that they could get. They've managed to mix in some young and old. We've got Tough 2 is represented in Joe Daddy Stevenson, and Tough 22 is represented in Mehdi Baghdad. So we've got the we've got the full gamut, and Tom Galicchio as well is from Tough 22. So we've got a good spread of people over a reasonable length of time. I think it'll be interesting. Is it going to produce the next UFC welterweight champion or lightweight champion? No, it isn't. Let's be honest. But what it is going to give us, I think, is an interesting season of tournament fighting, and I think that'll be worth watching. So I'm looking forward to it. As in terms of the other part of the question, which was about why they didn't pick up more of those flyweights and bring them into the UFC. That's a good question, because the flyweight division right now is not the deepest. But what you also need to bear in mind is none of those guys are going to be better than the top 3 or 4 in that division that they've already got. So all they're doing by bringing them in is padding out a division with fights that not a huge amount of people are going to be interested to watch. And that's not belittling the flyweights as opposed to any other division. It just that just seems to be the case, that people are less interested in watching flyweights than they are watching light heavyweights. And the light heavyweight division is pretty thin. So I think that's what it is. But I don't know what they're doing with the roster right now. They're doing, they made a lot of cuts, and I don't know. The thought occurred to me the other day, Sandy, that maybe they're moving towards having like a roster of stars, and they're just going to rotate the stars and maybe thin the cards down a little bit, and do it like that. I think that dilutes the product, but allows them to sell on the basis of the stars being there. And they might think that they can still pull the same money, but I don't know if that's the great idea, if that is what they plan on doing. But it remains to be seen. I think the best way to sort of assess what's going on with this ownership deal and the way they're dealing with the business is probably in about 8 to 10 months' time, and they'll have been in place for about a year by then. And I think by then we'll have a better picture of exactly what they're looking to do. Because at the moment it feels like we're in transition, doesn't it?
It does. But I think the one beneficiary out of this whole situation might be the likes of Bellator, might be the likes of Ryzen FF. Is that what they're called? Ryzen FF?
Yeah, Fighting Federation, isn't it, or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, Ryzen FF. What a name. They just signed Horiguchi. Which is great for them.
You'll be fighting Gabby Garcia next then.
Yeah, exactly. In an open weight, or maybe Baruto in the very first, open weight tournament where you get two fighters from the opposite ends of the scale going up against it. Unbelievable. But look, like you said, Simon, we are in a state of transition at the moment, and it's just fascinating to see what It's almost like a daily occurrence. There's just new things that are happening all the time with the UFC, whether it's a production thing, whether it's a fighter being cut or a fighter being signed, or what kind of fights they're putting together from a matchmaking point of view. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. But I do think this is going to be an interesting time for the likes of Bellator to jump in and get as many of the free agents as they possibly can to try and even the playing field on an event by event basis. I think we spoke about it before. I think Bellator are starting to put together a roster where you can put a main event like a Fedor versus Mitrione. That's going to get you eyeballs. That's going to get you media attention. That's going to get you perhaps. And had Fedor and Mitrione taken place this past weekend, that would have got the lion's share of the coverage of MMA this past weekend, without a doubt. Because that fight fell through, it kind of the air out of the balloon just went, and it kind of just deflated, and then everybody was kind of focused on Sunday night straight away, pretty much. But yeah, interesting time, especially with the renewal of the TV deal at the end of the year. That's going to be the big one. We'll see how that kind of plays out, and if the fighters can unionize and come together and see if they can get a piece of that pie, because otherwise it looks like that might be locked in for another decade. Well, there's a question directed directly at you now, Simon, and this is from our good friend Tracy Trudeau from Canada, one of my favorite members of the MMA community. Dear Simon, your expert selection for all 80s walkout music for each of the UFC 209 main card fighters. Go on then, Si. Your Spotify playlist is one of my favorites to listen to, especially when I'm flying across the Atlantic, especially for a UFC event. Can you put together some sort of walkout music for Tracy there from the top of your dome right now, for maybe not the entire main card, but how about the main and co-main event? What kind of walkout music from the 80s would you pick out or cherry pick for these fighters?
It's difficult because my first pick for Tyron Woodley, Mama Said Knock You Out, was going to be my pick until I realised that got released in 1990 and immediately disqualified it. The reason why I was going to pick that is because I was at the first fight. I was at 205, and all you could hear during the fight was Mama Woodley from the front row, who was just round the corner from us, going, "You see him, Tyrone? You see him, Tyrone?" And all. It just reminded me, just his mum was just basically screaming at him through the whole fight. It was quite something to see. So that was going to be my pick. I struggled. I went for Michael Jackson. I went for "Wanna Be Starting Something" by Michael Jackson. It's a great track, and Woodley feels like he always wants to be starting something with someone right now. So that kind of makes sense. Wonderboy Thompson. There is only one song that Wonderboy Thompson should walk out to, and that's the one that he does walk out to, which is Tenacious D's Wonderboy. But if you had to swap it for an Aces tune, he is the Karate Kid grown up. So he needs to walk out to "You're the Best Around" by Joe Esposito. That is the pick for Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. So we've gone from Karate Kid. We're going to stay on the 80s movies tip with the co-main event. This is Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. Russia versus the United States of America. If I say to you, fighting, Russia, USA, 1980s movies, you've got to be thinking of Rocky IV. You've got to be thinking of Rocky IV. So, Khabib walks out to "No Easy Way Out" by Robert Tepper, which is one of my favourite all-time walkout songs. That has to be that. So, you need something to play off that. So, Tony Ferguson, I'd have him walking out to "Living in America" by James Brown. I think that would be a great pick. I think the crowd would love it. That would be my pick. I've gone through the rest of the main card, mate. I've got others.
Go for it, Simon. Don't let me stop you now. You're on a roll.
Dan Kelly is fighting Rashad Evans. Rashad Evans is Sugar Rashad Evans, so he needs to come out to Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard. That would be my pick for him. Take the sexual references out of the song, please. Dan Kelly can only walk out to Men at Work, Down Under. It's stereotypical, I know. It's predictable, but so am I. So, yeah, Dan Kelly walks out to Down Under by Men at Work. Lando Venata takes on David Tamer. That is going to be an absolute banger of a fight, by the way. I'm looking forward to that. Groovy Lando is going to walk out to Let's Groove by Earth, Wind and Fire, which is an absolute classic. If you are not familiar with the work of Earth, Wind and Fire, then you need to check them out. And I don't think Earth, Wind and Fire are a trio, by the way. So that doesn't mean there's someone called Earth and someone called Wind. Who'd want to be called Wind anyway? But yeah, Let's Groove would be my pick for them. David Tamer. There wasn't anything specific. I didn't want him to walk out to ABBA because he's Swedish. So I've just given him a song that sort of fit him. So I'm having him walking out to some Duran Duran, Hungry Like the Wolf. That would be my pick for him. I think it kind of fits his fighting style. And I assume this will be the opener or will be on the main card. Alistair Overeem and Mark Hunt will be on the main card. I can just picture Overeem walking out to Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses. I think it would, the visual would be brilliant of this absolute hulk of a man walking out to Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses. Mark Hunt, he's got a sledgehammer for a left hand. He's got a sledgehammer for a right hand. So he needs to walk out to Peter Gabriel's sledgehammer. I know Ilia Latifi should be walking out to Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel because that is his nickname. But he's not on this fight card. So Mark Hunt can have that, Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel. So there you go. I don't know. I don't think they've confirmed the actual official lineup. And there might be 6 fights on that main card. But they're the 5 fights I looked at. And I very quickly sort of ran down my cheesy 80s playlist on Spotify and plucked those 10 songs out. So there you go. Hopefully that fits the bill.
Well, I must say, Simon, I don't think I'm going to be able to listen and watch these fighters walk out to anything other than these songs. I might have to mute the TV and get your particular playlist ready and on the go when they start to walk out to the octagon, because that was some fantastic stuff. And
we'll put it on the blog. Folks, we'll put it on the blog.
Yeah,
I'll embed all the YouTubes on there, and then people can. Maybe this might become a regular thing. Who knows?
And for those of you who do have a Spotify account, I do highly recommend. I think if you could just search Simon Head, you'll find his playlist, and I'm sure he'll chuck it on the blog when this podcast goes up, so you can find the link there. It is a fantastic playlist, I must say. For those of you who like fight music, like some of the familiar songs you hear when you're at a UFC event, or some of the songs you hear the fighters walk out to, or if you're just a fan of some classic music from the 80s and 90s, then Simon Head's playlist is definitely going to be up your street. I don't know how to transition from that, but we're going to transition from that, Simon. And that's going to be going now to our final question from Amir, who says, who do you think, is the ideal matchup for Dan Hardy if he decides to return? Now, I did ask Simon to refrain from speaking about a particular moment during his experience at Cage Warriors on Saturday night, because I knew this question was coming up around the corner concerning Dan Hardy. So I guess, Simon, before we start to speculate on who we should, or who we would want to see Dan Hardy fight should he make a comeback, there might be some listeners right now that may have not heard the news. So why don't you set it up for us? You're at Cage Warriors, Dan Hardy, John Gooden, and amongst a whole bunch of other current UFC fighters are in attendance in some sort of meet and greet fashion for Cage Warriors, which I thought was a nice touch on their part. And then you got a chance to speak to Dan Hardy, so why don't you take it away?
Yeah, no, we managed to grab Dan. He was there as a guest at Cage Warriors, and managed to collar him just after he did a fan meet and greet with a load of the former Cage Warriors stars, of which, of course, he's one former Cage Warriors star. And I'd asked him a load of questions about Cage Warriors and all the rest of it, and looking forward to the UFC London show. And I kind of ummed and ahed about asking him about his fighting future because it's kind of cheesy now. Every time he gets in front of a camera or someone puts a microphone in front of his face, it feels like everyone is just always pestering the guy about when's he going to come back, and it gets a bit tired after a while, but you've got to ask the question because you never know. And I asked the question, and he gave a very interesting answer. I asked him, "Have you got any update? I know you were having some tests done," and he said, "Yeah, I've had the tests. I've got the results. It's very positive." And to sort of keep it nice and short, he said, "I feel confident. I've got the paperwork to prove that I can fight again." And everyone who was in the room was like, "Whoa, okay." So I sort of pressed him on it and got a bit more information on it. And, he said, obviously there's a lot of bridges that he's going to need to cross if he does it. He's got to decide who he wants to fight against. He needs to get back in the testing pool. He needs to get back in the training regimen. I mean, he still trains, but he doesn't train fight camp level. So he'll need to get back into a fight camp. He was telling me he walks around at 185, and I think he feels pretty confident he can make it down to 155. So I think that's probably the weight class he'd be looking at. He says he's never felt sort of stronger, leaner, and more psychologically sound than he's ever been. The one fight he doesn't want and won't take is Mickey Gall. So I know as soon as the news went out, a lot of people were tweeting saying, Mickey Gall can fight him then. That fight is not happening. He's not going to fight Mickey Gall. He said he's not interested in challenging for a belt or rankings or anything like that. And he said, if I'm going to step in, it'll be a big fight. I'll step in, have a good war, and then I'll step back away again and get back into commentary. Because he said he feels that's his place now. That's where he needs to be. That's where he can do the most for the sport. But his competitive juices are still there. I mean, he was bouncing around on his toes by the end of the interview because he said he was in the car coming to the arena and he told his wife, Lacey, I wish I was fighting on this card. He's itching to get back. He really is. And it sounds like it'll probably be a one-shot deal. Come back, have one fight, and then go from there. And then, just sort of jump back into commentary again. And I think he wants someone who is of a similar age, perhaps, or of a similar experience level. Someone who he can have a real tear up with, but has that level of respect for. So the names that immediately leap out to me would be Diego Sanchez and Joe Lozon. Those fighters of that ilk. I think Lozon would be arguably the trickier opponent. I think he's got better form than Diego, I think, over the last couple of years. But I think a fight with either of those two guys would be dynamite. It would be great. It'd be very interesting. I think both sides of the coin would do a great job of selling the fight in completely different ways. I think Lozon's a fascinating character. Diego Sanchez is a fascinating character. So I think that's what the most likely thing. He's now got to go. Dan's got to go to the UFC now if he decides he wants to do this, and say, "Here's my documentary proof." And I asked him after and said, "Okay, who's this from?" And he said, "It's from the best cardiologists in the country. Have given me this." And he's buzzing. Believe me, mate, he is buzzing at the prospect. And the final thing, because I'm going on about it now. I said to him at the end of the interview, I've got £100 in my pocket, and I'm going to put the money down on you making a comeback by this time next year. Should I be putting that money down? And he said, I'd put £50 of it down. He said, but I'd put all of it down if it was to make a comeback by the end of next year. So he seems pretty set that, and the reason why he said by the end of next year was just because of all of the legal. The bureaucratic hoops that he'd have to jump through, USADA, and then getting everything ready in terms of his fight camp, test weight cuts and all that stuff. So it's exciting times, mate. Dan Hardy might be ready to make a one-fight comeback?
Yeah, I like Lozon and I like Sanchez, but I also want to throw Gilbert Melendez into the mix. Gilbert Melendez is someone who's also spent a lot of time doing the analyst role, like Dan Hardy has for ESPN and the like over stateside, and I think now it's for Fox Sports. And he's pretty much the same age as Dan Hardy, and I think stylistically, it'll be a very pleasing on the eye type of fight. I think they'll both stand in the pocket and trade and kind of go at it for 3 rounds. Melendez is ranked at the moment right outside of the top 10 anyway. He's definitely at the latter part of his career. I don't think he's going to be mixing it up with the likes of Khabib Nurmagomedov or Tony Ferguson or Eddie Alvarez or any of these guys anytime soon. But to be honest with you, Sanchez, Melendez, Joe Lozon, take your pick. I'm all in. It's just great to see such a massive pioneer for UK MMA in Dan Hardy. Just be given the choice to be able to want to fight again. To be able to have something that you enjoy get taken away from you, and it's out of your control. It's not something that I've personally experienced before, but I'm sure it's something that really gets you down and really disheartens you. And think of what he's done during the period of since he stopped fighting. He's been an analyst, he's been a commentator, he's been a yachtsman on a round the world trip. He's done so much outside of the sport. He's an author. He's got his own book. So and who knows? Maybe the time away, maybe the rest, maybe stepping away from the punishment of grueling camps may have done his body good in terms of allowing it to heal and almost give him a second wind and give him some career longevity. We'll see what GSP looks like when he comes back after 3+ years out of the game. So, but the main thing is, I think this being the Brit Pack and us being British journalists, it's always good to see one of the Brits have some positive news. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions thrown at Dan Hardy over the coming weeks and months as he tries to get, like you said, Simon, some of this red tape sorted out with the UFC. That was the final question. But before we go, I did want to bring up one question that I think it'd be good for us to discuss. And there was some pretty big news that broke this week. And that's GSP, George St. Pierre, has finally done a deal, got it sorted. He's back in the good graces of the UFC, and they've sorted things out, and he's hashed out a new deal, and he will be making a comeback. And it looks like he'll be at some stage in the third or fourth quarter of 2017, which is fantastic. Arguably the greatest of all time. I know there's a lot of other GOATs in the discussion, in the mix, but he's one that has not been besmirched by any performance-enhancing drugs scandal. He's as clean as a preacher's sheets. And GSP back in is great for business. There's so many matchups you can make. And I know, there's lots of fancy matchmaking. And apparently, from what I hear, he's going to be speaking to the media a little bit later on this week. So I thought, Simon, before he does that, I thought perhaps you and me could just throw one fight out there just for speculation's sake, make a case for it, and then we'll see what eventually transpires in the coming weeks and months. So I'm going to throw this over to you first. If you are the UFC, and maybe you can see this from a few different angles. If you're the UFC, if you're George St. Pierre, if you're just a fan, if you're a member of the media, what, in your opinion, what would you, Simon Head, like to see and in terms of GSP's return fight in the UFC?
I think if I was sitting in the matchmaker's shoes right now, I think the fight that makes the most sense and the fight that makes the most business sense is the Anderson Silva fight. I think that's the fight that makes the most sense to me at this stage. I think to throw him back in the welterweight title picture when the likes of Damian Maia seems to have been waiting forever for a title shot, I think it muddies the waters a bit. I think it creates a bit of a log jam where you're just throwing someone straight in there who's been out of the sport for as long as he has. I don't necessarily think that even though he was the champion and he went out as champion, given the current sort of layout of that welterweight division, throwing him straight back in for a title shot at this stage might be a little bit unfair. Likewise, the opportunity to sling him in there with Michael Bisping is obviously there. He wants to fight Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping, quite understandably, would love to fight George St. Pierre because George St. Pierre is a retirement fight. You know, that's his pension plan. If he fights George St. Pierre, and if I was Bisping, I'd want that fight to either be during International Fight Week or in Montreal. You know, in the biggest arena possible, because that's your pension plan. But you've also got Romero, Jacare, Musasi. You know, all these guys are queuing up to fight Bisping. So again, for GSP to sort of jump in there muddies the waters a little bit. Not that I wouldn't love to see that fight, because I certainly would. I think business reasons, and it's a fight that, as MMA fans, we've wanted to see for a long, long time. Anderson Silva versus George St. Pierre. Granted, Silva is no longer at his peak, and GSP's coming off a nearly 4 year layoff. So he won't be at his peak either. But that's a superstar fight that doesn't cause any divisional issues anywhere else. You get that fight done, and then you look to slot him in at middleweight or welterweight, whatever division it is he wants to compete in, or even lightweight he was talking about. So, but yeah, that would be the fight I would make: Anderson Silva versus George St. Pierre.
Yeah, Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, good fight. It'll definitely be a blockbuster fight. It'll sell a lot of tickets, get a lot of ratings, all that jazz. It just doesn't do it for me. So it did it for me 4 years ago, did it for me around 5 years ago, when they were both reigning supreme in their respective divisions, and you had the opportunity to make a super fight, a bona fide super fight, where you had two reigning champions in both welterweight and middleweight, both be going for it at a catchweight. But doing that now, I don't know, just for me personally, it doesn't get the juices going. I think, for me, the answer to this question is George St. Pierre is the one fighter, he's the one guy has carte blanche. I've got no problem with any fight. If it's Bisping, I've got no problem with it. If it's Conor McGregor, I've got no problem with it. If it's the winner of the Tyron Woodley Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight, I've got no problem with it. And it goes back to what I was saying before. He's arguably the greatest of all time. He's definitely the greatest welterweight champion of all time. He left as a champion, right? And it all comes down to what he wants. And I think from George St. Pierre's perspective, since he's been away, what's happened? He's seen Conor McGregor become the biggest superstar, the biggest draw in the game. So if he wants to fight him, and he's talked about going down to lightweight, he said that he can make that weight, great. On paper, George St. Pierre versus Conor McGregor is the biggest fight the UFC could put on right now. That would sell the most tickets. That would be the biggest box office draw. That would break all pay-per-view records, bar none. That would definitely get the job done. But also from George St. Pierre's perspective, he's now seen Conor McGregor become a two-weight champion. BJ Penn has been a two-weight champion. Maybe there's a part of him that doesn't want to leave the sport unless he's also been able to add that to his resume. And I kind of go back to the Bisping factor, where I think that would be a very interesting fight stylistically, where I think it could go either way. You've got the bigger man in Bisping. You've got George St. Pierre that would present a lot of problems for Bisping, especially when it comes to the wrestling aspect of the game. But I go back to what you were saying before about Bisping having this pension plan. You know what? I've got no problem with Michael Bisping trying to cash out now, given how much of a stalwart he's been for the sport. He's, like he said earlier on this week in an interview, I think it was with either Errol Helwani on the MMA Hour, or it was subsequently with Bloody Elbow. He's never had £1 million paycheck, and you know what? I'll be damned if I personally, as a Brit, as a journalist of the sport and also a fan, wasn't able to see our best export in Michael Bisping be able to cash out while he still can as champion. If he rolls the dice with a fight against a Yoel Romero and he doesn't have that belt around his waist, perhaps that opportunity with George St. Pierre goes away forever. So right now, in a long-winded way to answer the question, it's all about what George St. Pierre wants. And it could be the biggest possible money fight in McGregor. It could be to go back to his old division and reign supreme there once again. It could be to become a two-weight champion. But for me, those options personally trump the Anderson Silva fight. And I think that's what's so fascinating about him coming back. There's just so many options on the table. And I think this is going to be a topic that's going to divide a lot of opinion. I've already seen people say, we don't want to see the Nick Diaz rematch. But hey, the Nick Diaz rematch would also make a lot of money. And they've both been out for quite some time. And you'd like to think that would be a pretty easy fight for GSP to come back to, just to kind of get some ring rust off and dust himself off a little bit against the Nick Diaz. So it's fascinating times, isn't it, Simon? To see George St. Pierre come back now when McGregor's going to be out for God knows how long, and Ronda Rousey, who knows what's happening with her. This is what the sport's all about. It's about having the bigger superstars actively in the UFC fighting, being booked for fights, because that's what gets headlines. That's what gets so much, water cooler moments on a Monday morning, and gets, our community debating and talking about a lot of different topics and areas. So it's going to be fascinating to see how things develop. And I'm sure this time next week we'll be able to dissect some stuff that GSP says as he talks to the media later on this week.
Yeah, there's so many good... the thing is, I think whatever we're going to get, we're going to be pretty happy. I think the Conor McGregor fight, like if you said to me, okay, Simon, we are going to send you to cover George St. Pierre's next fight. If you want it to be the biggest fight possible, what fight's it going to be? It's going to be the Conor fight. I just don't see Conor fighting until next year. I just don't see it. Maybe they can use GSP to get Conor away from this boxing talk, because GSP versus Conor is such a big fight. Maybe they can pull the earnings up to a level whereas it might not be Mayweather level, it might well be at a level that makes it amenable enough to just put the Mayweather thing to bed, at least for a while, and then get back in the octagon again. Who knows? The Bisping fight, as a Brit, I would love to see Bisping in a super fight, and that would be a super fight. And as you mentioned about the payday thing, completely agree. I think he deserves to get a good payday. He deserves it. But there is also the meritocratic element of it, which is always in the back of my head, that if you're a champion, you've got to defend your belt against the next best guy. And that's kind of a balancing act. And Bisping isn't ducking these fights. He's freely said, I will fight all of them. But if GSP's available, I'd like him first. And I think that's completely understandable, and I wouldn't disagree with that. So I actually think that that's the most likely fight, to be honest. Bisping GSP, I think that's the most likely one. But I think looking at everything, I just thought that the Silva fight made more sense. It might not be the top pick on the list in terms of excitement, but I think it makes the most sense. But yeah, if everything was possible, Sandhu, it would have to be the Conor fight, wouldn't it? If everybody who was potentially in the mix, including Conor, and they all put their hand up and said, I want GSP next, that's a no-brainer decision, right? Conor McGregor versus GSP?
Absolutely. And you know what? I think this is a bit of a side topic area, but the whole idea of meritocracy, I think it's an interesting time in the sport, because there's so many decisions being made that aren't based on meritocracy. And I think for the longest time, I was, like a lot of members of the media, just passionate about making sure things are done by the book, by the numbers, who deserves it, who's earned it, by meritocracy. I think I'm just slowly starting to say, you know what, if this is what the WME IMG owners want with this UFC product, if this is how they're going to run the ship, then fine. And if that's the rules that they want to play with, let's just talk and dissect and stipulate and speculate in and amongst the rules that they're now creating. In a perfect world, yes, of course, you want things done by who's ever earned the shot. If that was the case, we wouldn't have seen the Wonderboy Thompson rematch. I'm a firm believer if you're a challenger and you don't get the job done, even if it's a draw, you don't get the job done. That should be Damian Maia's next crack, And so there's always things we can talk about when it comes to meritocracy. I think I'm slowly, and listen, maybe there might be some other fans, there might be some other media members that feel the same way. I might be in the minority, I'm not sure. I'm just slowly starting to drift away, not too far. I think the majority of the fights that we still see are still based on meritocracy. I just think it's the big blockbuster fights. What's going to sell the most tickets, put most bums on seats, and get most pay-per-view draws, especially at a time when they're trying to generate as much revenue as possible. So many different angles to kind of come into this topic area, and so many other fights, especially when it comes to McGregor and, whether Nate Diaz is going to come back, and Nick Diaz, and fascinating time, Simon. Fascinating time.
It is. I don't know why, but when you were talking then and you mentioned the Wonder Boy Woodley rematch, it immediately made me think of Rocky. Rocky 1 was fighting as showbiz, right? It was Apollo Creed was the all-conquering champion. He was bored with the guys he was fighting. Give me someone different. Give me someone new. Give me, let's make a story out of this. Let's pluck this Italian guy out of nowhere and give him a go, And that was Rocky 1. Then they drew at the end of Rocky, right? I don't think I'm spoiling anything. Rocky came out in like 1978, right? So then we had Rocky 2. Rocky 2 was the rematch. You had to have a rematch. But at the end of Rocky 1, Apollo Creed's like, ain't going to be no rematch. Ain't going to be no rematch. Rocky 2, the rematch. It needed to happen. There wasn't a defined result. And that's what we've got with Wonder Boy Wonder Boy versus Woodley. And it just made me grin because even then you got in the fictional world of the World Championship picture in the Rocky films, you had the first fight was basically a showbiz fight, a money fight, a fight that was made purely to serve the purposes of the promoter, who in that case was Apollo Creed because he was self-promoting, right? But then the second fight, Apollo Creed didn't want that fight. That was a rematch, and he needed to be goaded into it. And that was because of the wave of support. It was, this guy deserves another go. You couldn't beat him first time. And eventually that ate away at Apollo Creed, and he had to take the rematch. It's interesting because that's what we've got. And so I think with fight sport, it's hard not to have both. You need to have the showbiz angle, and I think you also need to have some element of credibility to it as well. And it's marrying up the two. And it's going to be fascinating to see how the UFC's new owners balance that. And we might lean a little bit more towards the showbiz side, and that's fine. But I think you've got to maintain that strand of credibility there. Otherwise, you've just got the WWE with real punches. So, which will be a fun product. Don't get me wrong, and but it won't be a sport anymore. And as a sports journalist of nearly 18 years, that is the number one thing. That is the number one thing. So, that for me is a thing that underpins everything. But yeah, it's fascinating, and I agree with you. GSP should fight whoever GSP wants to fight. He earns this.
He's earned that, right? Oh, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that when he does fight, it will be the biggest fight of the year, without question. And if he fights Conor McGregor, then oh my goodness me, there's going to be some buzz flying about. So can't wait to see what he does next, and really looking forward to hearing what he has to say later this week.
Well, I enjoyed that. That wasn't an official question sent in to us, but I thought it would be remiss if we didn't mention it, as it was one of the biggest headline stories of the week. And like I mentioned earlier on the show, Simon, bit of a quiet week coming up. All we've got in terms of opportunity this week is we've got this Bellator press conference to go cover in central London tomorrow. There's no UFC event this upcoming weekend, but I guess next weekend we will be previewing UFC 209, which takes place in Las Vegas the following weekend, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more questions to answer in the Q&A segment as well. But as far as this week's Q&A, that's a wrap.
And that's a wrap for show number 28 of the Brit Pack. Hope you enjoyed that. We will be back next Monday as we look ahead to UFC 209, and we'll look back on the Bellator stuff. You can get in touch with us on Twitter. I'm at Simon Head. Sandhu is at Sandhu MMA, and the show and this is the place to tweet all your questions to, is at the Brit Pack MMA. Our website is thebritpackmma.com, and you can subscribe to the show via iTunes, via Stitcher, via Acast, and via SoundCloud as well. Hope you enjoyed that. I did, and we will speak to you in a week's time as we look ahead to UFC 209.